struggling single mom can't afford her daughter's medicine. Then the lonely millionaire CEO behind her whispered, "Charge it to me." The automatic doors of the late-night pharmacy slid open. With a hiss as Sienna stepped inside, cradling her 7-month-old daughter, Maisie. The baby burned with fever, her flushed cheeks damp with sweat, her small body shuddering with weak cries. Rain had soaked through Sienna's coat, her hair clinging to her temples as she clutched a folded prescription in one hand and gently rocked her daughter with the other. Only one cashier remained. Behind the counter, eyes half-lit with fatigue. The store was silent, except for the hum of the lights overhead. Sienna stepped forward, her voice trembled. "Hi, I need to fill this. It's for my baby. She has a fever and ear infection." The technician took the slip, typed in the medication, and then looked up. 8,640. Sienna nodded slowly and reached into her purse, pulling out a handful of crumpled bills and coins. She smoothed them out, counted once, then again, fingers fumbling, breath quickening. "I only have 43, she whispered. "I get paid next week, but she needs this now." Maisie let out another hoarse, high-pitched cry. Her limbs twitched restlessly and her head lolled against Sienna's chest. The clerk sighed. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't do partial payments. I can hold the prescription for 24 hours if you want to come back." Sienna stood frozen, her throat tightened. For a split second, her knees buckled slightly under the weight of it all. Maisie's fever, the shifts she'd worked without rest, the pile of unpaid bills, and now this wall between her child and the medicine she needed. "I can't," she began, her voice breaking. She tried to steady herself, blinking rapidly. "Please, she's burning up." The clerk offered nothing more than silence. Maisie cried again, louder this time, raw and aching. Sienna clutched her tighter, her own tears now slipping down her cheeks. "I'm trying," she whispered to her daughter. "I'm trying, baby." Then, softly from behind, came a voice. "I'll cover it. Charge it to me." Sienna turned around, startled. A man stood a few steps behind her, tall, composed, wearing a dark coat. His face was calm, his eyes kind. He looked to the pharmacist. "Please go ahead with the full payment," he said. "I'll take care of it." The tech looked between the two of them, then began ringing it up. Sienna shook her head almost instinctively. "No, please. I can't let you do that. You don't even know me." The man's voice remained gentle. "You don't have to know someone to care. No one should have to choose between money and their child's health." Something in his tone, steady, certain, cut through the panic in her chest like a thread of light. He didn't look at her with pity. There was no judgment in his eyes, just a quiet, unwavering kindness. She didn't know how to respond. Her lips parted, but no words came. The pharmacist handed her the bag of medication. She took it with both hands, staring at it like it was made of glass. Maisie whimpered, then settled slightly, her cheek pressed to Sienna's collarbone. Sienna turned back toward the man. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said. "Just get her home. Get her warm." She nodded, her voice small. "Thank you. Truly." He smiled gently, but said nothing more. She gathered Maisie in one arm and the bag in the other, and made her way toward the exit. Outside, the rain still fell, but it felt different, softer somehow. She paused under the awning for a moment, looking down at her daughter's flushed face. Then she breathed, really, breathed, for the first time in weeks. Inside the store, the man watched them go. As the door slid shut, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to the pharmacist. "If she comes back, please give her this." And then he too disappeared into the rain. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time Sienna unlocked the door to the narrow basement apartment she called home. The walls were thin, the carpet frayed, and a draft always found its way in. But tonight, none of that mattered. Maisie was sleeping now, nestled in her arms, her fevered cries replaced by soft, even breaths. Sienna gently laid her down on the small crib mattress beside her bed, pulling a faded blanket over her daughter's tiny frame. She sat beside her for a moment, brushing damp curls from Maisie's forehead, whispering promises she was never sure she could keep. When she finally opened the small pharmacy bag, 2 bottles of medicine rolled out, one for the fever, the other for the infection. Nestled between them was something she had not noticed before. A business card. Callum Blake. Private line for when you need to breathe. Sienna stared at the card. The name sounded powerful, important. The font was elegant but understated. Her fingers lingered on the word breathe, and her throat tightened. She placed the card on the nightstand and walked to the tiny kitchen table. There, under the soft yellow light of a mismatched lamp, she took out a worn notebook and tore a page from the back. She didn't know what to say. Not really, but something inside her needed to respond. She began to write, her handwriting shaky, but sure. Dear stranger, you do not know me. Maybe you never will, but tonight you helped me breathe again. Not just my daughter, but me. You didn't save me. You reminded me I still mattered. Thank you. She paused, looked at the words, then folded the note carefully without signing it. The next morning, she used a portion of her grocery money to buy a plain white envelope and a single stamp. She addressed it to the company name on the back of the business card, Blake Holdings, Midtown office. She slipped it into the mailbox down the street without hesitation, then turned around before she could change her mind. Across the city, in a tall building of glass and steel, Callum Blake stepped into his office late that evening. The day had been long, endless meetings, half-hearted conversations, and people who always seemed to want something. He poured himself a glass of water and sat at his desk, loosening his tie. His assistant had left the note for him earlier in the day. No return address, just marked personal. It had sat on the corner of his desk for hours while he buried himself in numbers and contracts. Now, with the office quiet, he finally opened it. He read the letter once, then again and again. When he was done, he pressed the thin piece of paper flat on his desk. He read it aloud under his breath, the words sticking to the back of his throat. You didn't save me. You reminded me I still mattered. He leaned back in his chair, the letter resting gently in his hand. And suddenly, he was not a CEO. He was 8 years old again, lying alone in a cot at the group foster home, his chest rattling with each breath, fever scorching through him. No one coming. He remembered the nurse who came by once and said, "You'll be fine," before disappearing for the rest of the night. He remembered staring at the ceiling, barely able to cry anymore, praying to anyone or anything that anyone would whisper, "I'll cover it." But no one ever did until now. Now he was that voice. He had said the words he had needed to hear his entire childhood, and somehow they had landed exactly where they needed to go. He folded the letter once more, carefully, precisely, and slipped it into the worn leather wallet he kept in his coat pocket. The photo of his late mother was in there. So was the only birthday card he had ever received as a boy. Now this letter joined them. He stared out the window, the city twinkling below him, the night calm and expansive. For a long time, he said nothing. But something inside him shifted, something like healing. The morning rush was heavier than usual, and Sienna's arms ached from the weight of the delivery tray. A dozen coffees, balanced in 2 carriers, names scribbled in black ink on plastic lids, and a breakfast bag slung over her shoulder. She had done this route so many times she could almost navigate the building blindfolded. She pushed through the revolving doors of Grant Holdings, nodded at the security guard, and made her way to the elevators. The mirrored walls reflected her slightly wind-blown hair, the light circles under her eyes, the faint lipstick she had applied in the staff bathroom downstairs. She pressed the button for the 27th floor. The elevator doors were just beginning to close when a hand slipped in, stopping them. She looked up. Callum Blake stepped inside. He wore a navy suit, no tie, coat draped over his arm, sharp, composed, exactly the kind of man who never had to look twice at a delivery girl. But when he turned and saw her, his face shifted instantly from neutral to something warmer. "See," he said, surprised but clearly pleased. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "I'm glad I did." She blinked. "You remember me?" His smile deepened. "I don't forget faces, especially not ones I've worried about." There was a pause. Sienna looked down at the tray in her hands. "I'm just delivering coffee," she said quietly. He nodded. "And I'm just riding in." Elevator. The silence between them was light, but meaningful. She could feel the weight of his gaze without it being uncomfortable. "Would you join me for a cup?" he asked as the doors slid open. 5 minutes. "I owe you at least that." She hesitated. "You don't owe me anything. It's not charity," he said gently. "Just gratitude for letting me help that day." She hesitated, torn between politeness and practicality. The coffees were on a deadline, and she was on the clock. Still, something in his voice, sincere and unpressured, eased her tension. "I should get these upstairs," she murmured, stepping out. "Of course," he said, not pushing further. "Maybe next time," she nodded, not making promises. 10 minutes later, when the delivery was done, Sienna returned to the lobby. On a whim, she stopped by the building cafe and bought a black coffee. Simple, strong. She pulled a napkin from the dispenser and reached into her bag for a pen. Carefully, she wrote a single line in her small, neat handwriting. "You help me breathe. Maybe today this helps you." Pause. No signature, just a message. She carried the cup to the receptionist and left it with Callum's name. Then she walked out the front doors and into the morning light. Upstairs, an hour later, Callum returned from a meeting to find the cup on his desk. No note, no explanation, just the faint warmth still lingering in the cardboard sleeve and the handwriting that stopped him cold. He sat at his desk, staring at the message on the napkin, reading it twice, then 3 times. "You help me breathe. Maybe today this helps you pause." He smiled. Not the practiced, polite expression he wore in boardrooms, but something softer, private. In a world where everything came with strings attached, where his name attracted either envy or expectation, this was different. It was real. He folded the napkin carefully and slid it into the drawer where he kept personal things. A watch from his late mentor, a photo of his childhood dog, the anonymous letter he still carried from that night in the pharmacy. For a moment, he sat there in silence. Then he picked up the coffee, took a sip, and let himself finally pause. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla hung in the hallway like a soft memory. Laughter echoed faintly from the children's playroom, layered with the occasional squeak of rubber soles and the jingling of a toy bell. Sienna stood near the coat hooks, her arms cradling a large Tupperware container filled with handmade cookies, tiny hearts, stars, and bears carefully iced with pastel colors. She wore no makeup. Her blonde hair was swept into a loose bun, strands falling around her cheeks. There were shadows under her eyes, but her smile, gentle, patient, was the brightest thing in the room. She set the cookies down on the table and crouched beside a little boy whose nose was running and cheeks were flushed from crying. Without hesitation, she pulled a clean handkerchief from her pocket and wiped his face gently, murmuring words soft enough to calm a storm. "You matter," she whispered as the boy snuffled, pressing his face into her shoulder. "Even when the world forgets you, you still matter." Callum stood just beyond the doorway, hidden in the shadowed hallway. He hadn't come there to see her. It was supposed to be a brief visit, part of a corporate donation initiative. A few minutes of photographs with the director, a check handoff, and a smile for the newsletter. But then he saw her. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. No fanfare, no press, no performance, just Sienna, barefaced, sleeves rolled, surrounded by a small crowd of sticky fingers and curious eyes. She handed out the cookies one by one, remembering names, crouching to their level, laughing when one of the toddlers insisted she take a bite of the cookie she'd just iced herself. She had no idea anyone was watching. She doesn't even know she's healing people. Callum murmured to himself. It wasn't just the way she cared. It was the way she didn't need to be noticed for it. A little girl climbed into her lap with ease like she'd done it 100 times before. Sienna adjusted her instinctively, humming a lullaby under her breath as she rocked slightly. When another child tripped and fell nearby, she reached out. Without missing a beat, pulling them close and checking their elbow for scrapes. Callum felt something shift. Inside his chest, something tender, something old, something unspoken. He had grown used to performances, grand gestures, public kindness meant for applause, but this was sacred, and it was real. Diana finished passing out the last of the cookies and began gathering the wrappers and crumpled napkins. As she stood to leave, a small origami star slipped from her coat pocket and floated silently to the floor. She didn't notice. Callum stepped forward only after the front door clicked shut behind her. The children were still busy munching, the room buzzing with innocent chatter. He reached down and picked up the paper star, delicate and creased from being folded. He turned it over. A message was written inside, softly inked and faded. Blue pen. "I may not have much, but I still have love to give." Callum exhaled. Slowly. In his world of billion-dollar deals and designer suits, people talked about what they owned, what they earned, what they deserved. But she gave, from a place of having so little. And somehow that made it mean more. He held the tiny paper star in his hand, closing his fingers around it carefully, as if it might dissolve if he gripped too tightly. For a moment, he didn't feel like the CEO or the benefactor. He just felt human and quietly, irrevocably drawn to her. Not for what she looked like, not for what she lacked, but for the softness she gave the world without asking for anything in return. He slipped the star into his wallet, beside the letter she'd written, beside the first note that had reminded him what kindness could feel like. And as he left the orphanage, he knew something had changed. He didn't just admire her now. He was beginning to feel something deeper, something that had nothing to do with circumstance and everything to do with heart, something that scared him in the best way. The late afternoon light spilled into the corner office of Grant Holdings, catching on the edge of Callum's desk and painting the room in gold. Sienna sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple blouse and a cardigan with a loose button. Her braid had loosened in the wind. She looked like someone trying not to take up too much space. Callum handed her a mug of chamomile tea. "It's a little less intense," he said with a smile. Sienna gave a soft chuckle. "You read me well." He gestured to the window seat. "Would you like to sit there instead? It's where I go when I need to think." She nodded. The city stretched beyond the glass, all motion, and noise. But in here, it was still. They talked for nearly an hour about books, about Maisie's new habits, how she'd started making odd little sounds that sounded like singing. Sienna came alive when she spoke about her daughter. Her laughter was real. Callum mostly listened, offering the occasional comment, careful not to interrupt her rhythm. When it was time to leave, she smiled shyly. "Thank you for the tea and for being kind." Callum smiled. "Thank you for saying yes." She hesitated before walking out, and when the door clicked shut, he noticed a folder near her chair. Curious, he opened it, expecting invoices or work notes. It was drawings, delicate, pencil sketches, children mostly. Maisie appeared in several, but one stopped. Him. It was the pharmacy. Him holding Maisie, her head resting against his chest, bathed in a shaft of soft light at the bottom in quiet handwriting. "You became someone's safe place, maybe without even knowing." Callum sat back, motionless. Then slowly he framed the drawing and placed it on his desk. The next morning he texted her, "Oh, Maisie's feeling better today." She didn't respond. The next day, "The world's a little warmer with you in it." Still no reply, but he kept sending them photos, quotes, bits of beauty. No pressure, just quiet, steady presence. Tiana read them all. She smiled, sometimes cried, but she never replied because something inside her had begun whispering again. That voice she knew too well. "You're not enough. You don't belong in his world. He's kind, but that doesn't mean you deserve it." And then the whispers became real. Outside the cafe where she worked part-time, she overheard two coworkers laughing. "Did you hear? Callum Blake's been seen with that waitress from our shop." "Seriously? She's sweet, but I mean, come on. She brings her baby to her shift. It's not exactly boardroom material." Sienna turned away before they saw her. Her chest tightened. That night, while Maisie slept, the words echoed louder than ever. Her mother's voice. "You don't deserve a good man." She sat at the edge of the mattress. Maisie's hand clutched a stuffed rabbit, her fever easing, her breathing steady. Sienna brushed a strand of hair from the child's cheek. "You deserve the world," she whispered. "Even if I'm still learning how to believe, I do too." Her phone buzzed. A message from Callum. "Maisie's lucky to have you. I hope one day you see what I see." Tiana closed her eyes. She wasn't ignoring him because she didn't care. She was silent because she cared too much. And because some part of her still couldn't believe someone like him could see someone like her and love her anyway. She had learned how to survive, but not how to receive. Not yet. So she stayed quiet, not to push him away, but because her heart was still learning how to speak the language of love. Not earned, not owed, not borrowed, just love, real and steady, and waiting. The message was brief. "I need to learn how to stand before I can walk beside you." Callum read it 3 times. Every word felt chosen, deliberate, as if she had sat with it, held it, lived inside it. He stared at the screen long after it dimmed, the silence of his penthouse thick like fog. He did not reply. He knew not to. Sienna wasn't walking away from him. She was walking toward herself. So he let her. But letting go didn't mean vanishing. 2 days later, Sienna quit her cafe job. She enrolled in an online course in early childhood education, scraping by with a local grant and what little she had left in savings. To cover costs, she baked banana bread, peanut butter cookies, blueberry muffins. She sold them at the Saturday market and online through a handmade site her friend helped her build. She and Maisie walked to the park each morning, rain or shine. Sienna jogged as Maisie giggled from the stroller, or they sat beneath trees sharing fruit and storybooks. Change didn't happen all at once, but something in her began to shift. One afternoon, she helped an elderly woman cross the street, then knelt to tie her undone shoelaces. The woman placed a hand over Sienna's heart and said, "You move like someone who's decided she matters." Sienna smiled. She still had bad days, but now they didn't undo her. What she didn't know was Callum was still near. He never interfered, never crossed the lines she'd drawn, but sometimes he walked the park's outer path. His coat collar turned up, his gaze soft. Once he sat quietly on a bench just to hear Maisie laugh. He saw Sienna lift her daughter, help her toddle through the grass, point at butterflies. He saw her pick up trash, help strangers, listen patiently to children's endless stories. And then one afternoon, a tiny voice rang out. Callum turned. Maisie in the stroller was pointing straight at him, eyes wide, smiling. "Safe," she called again, bouncing with recognition. Sienna followed her gaze and froze. She hadn't seen Callum in months. Maisie wriggled to get out. Sienna lifted her, walking slowly toward him. "She calls you that," she said, quietly, in her sleep. "When she's upset, she murmurs safe and calms down." Callum didn't answer right away. Maisie reached for him. He hesitated, then opened his arms. She curled into his chest like she belonged there. "I thought I was just a stranger," he whispered. Sienna shook her head. "Not to her." Wind brushed through the trees around them. "She remembers," Sienna said. "Even if she was just a baby, she remembers the night someone stepped in when no one else did." Callum looked down at Maisie. Her eyes were already closing. "I just wanted her to breathe." "You did more than that," Sienna replied. "You gave her something before she had words for it. A place, a person." He handed Maisie back carefully. "She never forgot," she said softly. "And neither did I." Her voice trembled. Not with fear, but with truth. With something unspoken that had been quietly growing between them all along. Callum stepped back slightly. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You didn't just stand up, you rose." Sienna smiled. "I had someone remind me I was worth the effort." They stood like that for a long moment, and then they walked in opposite directions. Not because they were drifting, but because sometimes, even after someone sees you, you still need to finish becoming who you want to be. When they do, Maisie stirred in her mother's arms, mumbling again, "Safe." And this time, Sienna didn't just hear her daughter. She felt it in her own chest. Callum hadn't just helped them survive. He reminded them they were worthy of being saved in the first place. The ballroom shimmered with soft lights, floral centerpieces, and rows of round tables dressed in white linen. The banner above the stage read, "Mothers Rising, a night to honor resilience." Sienna stood backstage, her hands damp with nerves, clutching the edge of the note card she had rewritten 5 times. She had never spoken in front of a crowd before, not like this. She had almost said no, but the invitation letter had said, "Your story could be the reason another mother chooses to keep going." That was reason enough. She peeked through the curtain. The seats were full. Donors, community leaders, volunteers, and right in the center of the front row, in a navy suit and open collar shirt, sat Callum. His expression was calm, focused, but his eyes were speaking to her. "I'm here." The moment her name was called, the room applauded, and Sienna walked slowly to the stage, heels clicking softly against the wooden steps. She stood behind the podium, adjusted the mic, and took a breath. "I'm not a speaker," she began, voice trembling slightly. "I'm not used to spotlights or microphones, but I do know something about quiet battles, about holding a sick child in the middle of the night and not knowing how you'll make it through the morning." The room went still. "My name is Sienna Hart. I'm a single mom to a baby girl named Maisie." And not long ago I was standing in a pharmacy holding her as she burned up with fever. And I couldn't afford the medicine she needed. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I thought I would have to walk out of that store and just hope she'd be okay. Hope she'd survive. But then a stranger stepped forward and said, "Charge it to me." She glanced down at her notes, then slowly folded them, setting them aside. That act saved my daughter's life. But what he did after, the way he didn't disappear, the way he quietly reminded me over and over that I mattered even when I didn't believe it myself. That's what saved me. Callum's eyes glistened. His fingers were laced tightly in his lap. "I used to think survival was enough," Sienna said softly. "But I've learned that healing takes more. It takes someone believing in you before you believe in yourself." She paused, her voice steadier now. "I used to walk through this world like I was borrowing space. Now I teach my daughter that she belongs here, and I teach myself the same thing every day." The applause began, slowly then swelled across the room. Sienna stepped back from the mic. Before she could return to her seat, Callum stood up and walked to the stage. The room quieted instantly. He climbed the steps without a word, met her in the middle of the platform, and gently took her hand. The moment their fingers touched, it was as if the space between them vanished. Callum turned to the audience, his voice low but clear. "I thought I saved them," he said simply. "But the truth is, they saved me first." He turned back to Sienna. "Because when you've spent most of your life feeling like no one sees the real you, meeting someone who does, it changes everything." Sienna's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. Not tonight. Tonight, she stood in the light, and she did not shrink. 1 year later, the seasons had turned twice, and the rhythm of life had found something softer, something steady. The little preschool sat at the corner of a quiet suburban street, its picket fence painted pastel blue. Handprints of children stamped in every color along the wooden panels. Laughter echoed in the yard and tiny paper suns hung in the windows. Inside, a small sign on the front door read, "Little Roots Learning, where every child belongs." Sienna stood behind a low shelf filled with picture books, gently organizing a row of tiny shoes. Her diploma, freshly framed, hung on the wall near the entryway, Bachelor of Early Childhood Education, with honors. The building had once been a closed-down flower shop. Now it was alive again, just like her. What no one knew except the landlord in her heart was that the down payment had come quietly from someone who never once asked for credit. Callum's name was nowhere on the paperwork, but he was in every corner of the space. His faith, his quiet support, the way he had believed in her before she knew how to believe in herself. The school closed at noon that day for a rare long weekend. Sienna drove home with Maisie in the back seat, babbling about butterflies and snack time, and a boy named Theo, who kept eating her crayons. Their home sat on the edge of a small town just far enough from the city to feel like escape. A cozy wooden house with sunflowers in front and ivy along the fence. A porch swing that creaked when the wind moved just right. Wind chimes, made from seashells, danced in the breeze, filling the air with soft music. Maisie, now nearly 2 years old, dashed out of the car the moment it stopped. "Mommy's safe. Look," she shouted, waving a wrinkled piece of paper in the air. Sienna stepped out, wiping her hands on her skirt. "What is it, baby?" Maisie ran to her, nearly tripping over her own feet, and shoved the paper into her hands. It was a drawing, one of Sienna's. She had sketched it in a quiet moment the week before, then left it on the kitchen table, not realizing Maisie had taken it. 3 figures stood beneath a tall oak tree. A little girl with curly hair, a woman with a ponytail, and a man in a long coat, holding the girl's hand. Above them, scrolled in crayon, were the words, "My family." Maisie pointed proudly. "That's you. That's me, and that's safe." From the porch, Callum appeared, holding a glass of iced tea, sunglasses pushed back on his head. He had been watching, smiling. "Safe, huh?" he said, stepping down. Maisie barreled toward him. She ran straight into his arms, and he lifted her easily into the air, spinning once before pulling her close. "I thought that was my name now." Teeth.